Can you believe the beauty of this day? For this is the day the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. It is a gift in lieu of all eternity, which will be even better for the faithful, for those that are not bound up in fear and chaos, for those that walk by faith and trust. For without faith, it's impossible to please our Abba Father, the Lordship of Jesus Christ, who has made it all possible for us to walk in such beauty, for us to experience such joy, the joys of family and good friends, the joys of walking with intelligent, God-fearing, confident people. It seems the world today is a godless, fearful, Jesuit jab populace, in which most live in fear, live in doubt, confusion, hustling for the dollar, the fiat dollar, which is quickly dissolving into nothing thanks to the Fed and the fiat globalist centralized cartel. You know, centralized banking is communism. And anything centralized is going to be controlled by those that live for power, money, sex, PMS, as a lawyer buddy of mine says. You know, that same friend says there's a very thin line between life and death, which separates each and every one of us from all eternity. Think about it. Eternity. Long time. You have your New Agers, you have your humanistic psychics, you have your lost souls out there. You know, after spending 9 years in 6 universities, including Duke Divinity, for a short while, I realized that every breath drawn, the powers that bid for our soul are extremely, intensely awesome. Look at this. What majesty. What incredible beauty. Having been on this earth for many years, living a very, very blessed life, having been able to dedicate my life, by God's grace alone, to the Lordship of Jesus the Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, I realize that life is very short. And having been raised by two magnificent parents, one trained assassin, a Navy SEAL, a captain no less, a Duke Master's graduate, a very hardworking man, who always paid his fair share, which I always thought was a bit of an oxymoron, which it is. If people would just take the time to read R.W. Grace's report, sponsored by Ronald Reagan, President, they would know that the Fed is a private cartel cabal. They would know that not a penny of what is paid in federal tax goes to America, the U.S. Treasury. They would know that every time they file, they are supporting fraud and swearing under penalty of perjury and prison that every word is true and exact and correct, which is in no way the case. No way. Can't be. As I walk down this driveway, I'm riveted with the reality of how the only wisdom in this world comes from the Lordship of Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, for those that are Sabbath keepers and keepers of the feast, which I don't do, but I do appreciate those that are involved in that because they're learning. Unfortunately, a lot of them are dismissing the value of the gifts of the Spirit, which are vital to life itself, along with the fruits of the Spirit, which is what this life is all about. At the young age of 32, having been raised in the Presbyterian Church by a godly man, the frozen chosen, the predestined, at 32, he called me out. He woke me up. I was at a very low point in my life. I'd just come from skiing in the French Swiss Alps with 5 young ladies. One of them I was intimately involved with. We'd bought a house in Atlanta and Buckhead, started a company, raised a lot of money, did not have a clue what I was to do. I'd just been in a movie with Kenny Rogers, a B-rated movie. I was an extra in a bar scene. I watched him actually steal the producer's wife. It was a beautiful woman because Kenny had more money and I guess more charm and charisma. And I thought to myself, never forget, if that's how it's done in Hollywood, I don't believe I'm going to waste any more time here. So after getting paid nicely in cash, I departed, went back to my company, where my partner, the owner and president of the company, asked me, there were 3 or 4 of us working there, I was the PR guy, if I was happy there, to which I responded, no, I'm not. And he quickly asked me why I didn't figure out what I want to do with my life. And I said, you're right. So I called up this lovely young 22-year-old girl I'd bought a house with in Atlanta, and I said, hey, let's go to France and Switzerland and shopping in Paris, and let's spend a couple of weeks snow skiing in the Alps. And she said, absolutely. So we organized our plans and took off departing for Switzerland. We flew in and we were picked up by a limousine and taken to a place called Morzine in the French-Swiss Alps, where we were met by a enclosed gondola, which took all of our things up to the top of the mountain, where we were picked up in a horse-drawn sleigh and taken to our chalet. For the next week, I skied some of the most beautiful powder I have ever seen in my life. And since the girls were a little slower, I left them and skied with folks I couldn't speak their language, barely could understand, but had a lot of fun. Could ski all day and not travel the same course. And every day I did this, made it back by sunset for dinner. And the coming weekend, we took a train and traveled into Paris, where we did some shopping at Baccarat and Hermès, where I purchased some high-dollar ties and other items, crystal glasses we had shipped back, with little regard for cost or expense. We dined in some rooftop restaurants and had some lovely places we stayed, returning that Sunday to the resort, Morzine Alvarez, to complete another week of skiing, which we did, and then we flew back. I was met by an actor who had been calling me a day or two later, wanting to know where I'd been. Now, on the way back, once back in Atlanta, I traveled home to see the family. And after visiting with them, I stopped off in Boone, where I visited with Franklin Graham and Jane Austen, who I'd grown up with until the age of 10. Jane Austen asked me about the trip, and I shared it with her. And she said, Billy Graham's wife led me to the Lord. I said, well, Jane, I know the Lord. Just because I'm living with this girl and we've bought a house together doesn't mean that I don't know the Lord. And she said, okay. And Franklin walked in and he was kind of smiling. And I said, Jane, just because I'm living with this girl doesn't mean I don't know Christ. She said, okay. So anyway, I made my way on back to Atlanta, where my acting buddy called me and wanted to know if I would attend an event where 60 men would wait on us hand and foot, teaching us the love of Christ. I said, no. He said, well, I'm going to pick you up in about 15 minutes and take you to this event. And I said, no, I don't think so. And he was knocking on the door in about 30 minutes and said, get in the car, get your toothbrush, that's all you'll need. And I complied, to God's glory. And he took me away. I got to this event very disturbed that I wasn't going to be able to spend time with this lovely lady that I was anxious to see. Of course, she threatened me if I went away. And while at this event, I was threatened to be kicked out because they'd never had anyone that had been so rude and defiant. I guess I've always been a bit of a divergent. So they called me aside and they said, we don't know what to do with you. We don't know if we should let you continue to stay here. Well, at that point, I decided I did want to stay. So these elders, pastors, Christians, sat me down and asked me a series of questions like, do you believe in Jesus Christ? To which I said, of course I believe. Even Satan believes and trembles. Why would I not believe? And they said, is he Lord in your life? And I said, well, of course he's Lord in my life. What kind of question is that? And they said, well, if you were to die right now, would you go to heaven? I said, of course I would go to heaven. I'm a Presbyterian. I'm a Christian. And they said, well, we find there is something terribly wrong with your spirit. So we have more questions. I said, shoot. They said, who's in control of your life? And I paused for a moment and thought. I said, well, it's my girl, my house, my Porsche, our Mercedes. They all looked at each other and they said, son, you have no idea who Jesus Christ is. And a switch flipped. And I thought to myself, wow, he's got a point. He said, why don't you go to the chapel and pray, and we'll decide what we're going to do. So this big old 6'7" black guy stood up, weighing in at about 280. I guess he was he was one of the Falcon football players, Atlanta Falcon, if I'm not mistaken. And he said, boy, I said, yeah. He said, come with me. And I said, okay. We went down to this little chapel, and he sat down, and he started crying. And then he started praying in tongues and carrying on. Very emotional. I was like, wow. And he looked at me and he said, boy. I said, yes, sir. He probably wasn't much older than I was, maybe my own age. But he knew someone and something I didn't know. He said, do you know what to do? I said, sir, I am a theology, philosophy major, double major, triple minor, 9 years, 6 universities. Of course I know what to do. And he said, well, what are you waiting on? And I said, yeah, you're right. So he went back to praying, carrying on, praying in tongues, prophesying, tears rolling down his mighty cheeks. And I stood up and proceeded to the altar in this little tiny chapel. I got down on my knees. And for the next 30 minutes, I asked forgiveness, confessing every sin I could think of. And I didn't cover half of them, I reckon, in that 30 minutes. And then I asked the good Lord, I said, Father, if you can show me why I'm here on this earth, I will live it to the fullest, to your glory. I'll never have another woman, take another drug, never get drunk again, never pursue money. And if you can't show me why I'm here, please eliminate my life. Because you have bored me to tears. I said, if you can provide for the sparrows of the field, you can certainly provide for me as long as I walk in obedience to you, in accord with your word. I am now committing my life to you as a man of faith for your good pleasure and your provision and your use. But you know how I love women. You know how I've had a lot of relationships. You know how they've all ended poorly, with me usually finding a richer, better woman. See, as a pagan humanist, quote, Christian, Presbyterian, I knew from logic that I could work all my life and never achieve much. I didn't understand money. I didn't understand law. And I knew most lawyers didn't understand money or law, because I knew plenty of them, along with doctors and so on and so forth. So I said, Lord, you show me. You provide. You keep me in clothes and shoes on my feet. I'll go wherever you send me. I'll do whatever you lead me to do. I said, Lord, if you can't do that, I have no more reason to live. Not in this world, because you have bored me to tears with these women. As a pagan humanist, I believed, and a semi-Christian, I believed if you were going to marry the money. Why not? Didn't make sense to me to work all your life, paying your fair share, of which not one penny went to this country or to the Federal Reserve. And I saw how the Washington elite lived. I saw how they flew, most of them privately, and I'd been on private planes. In fact, I flew a jet one time, not very well, only because I didn't know what I was doing. But anyway, I said, Lord, if this is why I'm here, if this is why man's here to serve you, well, I'm your guy. And after praying that prayer, I got up and left, never to look back. Because that night, bunking with about 18 strangers, I asked everyone for prayer. And I was beside the light switch on the lower bunk. And everyone in that room jumped out of bed and came and laid hands on me and prayed, which was touching. So they went back to bed. In fact, the guy on the top bunk jumped off the bunk, laid hands on me. He was on his knees below me, and I was on the low bunk. And years later, I saw him. I said, why'd you do that? And he said, because I was on the top bunk. I didn't want to be there either. And I knew you were demon-possessed, and I knew demons went to the nearest heathen, of which I was. And I knew it. And so after they prayed, they all went back to bed. So I prayed for them. After I prayed for everyone in the room, I cut out the lights, went to sleep. They would get us up at sunrise. And I was not a morning person back then. I was kind of kept banker's hours at the company. And so they got us up and we went to breakfast. And this was the last day, the fourth day, if you will. And then it was time for the conclusion of the program. They called everyone together, and there were 60 of us men and 40 there were 40 of us men, 60 people waiting on us hand and foot, teaching us the love of Christ, which I thought was extremely considerate. So that morning at 6 o'clock or 6:30, about sunrise, whatever time it was, we would meet in a chapel, be 100 of us in there, a little chapel, and they would give us the sacraments. And I remember this big old ex-CIA agent was standing there with tears coming down his cheeks, holding the sacraments. And he said, "Have you seen the glory of God?" I remember this was, I think, 1984, summer, August, I believe. I went down on my knees and started weeping. I had been very abusive to most of the people there, especially this gentleman. He was overweight. I accused him of not being able to take care of the temple of God. For if he knew it was the temple of God, he wouldn't be severely overweight. Well, tears were coming down his cheek as I was on my knees weeping on the front row, experiencing the glory of God. Linguistically, I cannot describe it. Never have been able to. So I don't remember much else except after we had breakfast, we headed off to do what we were water baptized in a pool. I asked to be, and they obliged. Somewhat reluctantly, because the head rector of the event really didn't believe I had experienced much of a change, and the change was unbelievable.